On the podcast today, we're going to speak about my new book, Spiritual Freedom in the Digital Age, How to Remain Healthy and Sane in a World Gone Mad. And today we'll speak about some subjects within the book, but not all subjects. So, I implore you to go out and get yourself a copy. I'm actually excited about this book, particularly the timing of this book because of how the world has gone with technology and particularly social media. So Guyang and I will speak about a lot of different subjects today within the book. I do cover a lot in this book, but as I said, there are a lot of things that we will not cover today. So go out and get yourself a copy. And so the first topic that we're going to cover is the culture of sameness that is developing within the world. I discuss this in the book, and I kind of talk about my own dad and his view of how the world used to be better and so forth and so on. And, as a young kid, you kind of think, it's just dad being crazy again. He's an old crackpot and probably jaded and bitter about the world. And a lot of people do say that, as we get older, we always think that. But then I saw a kind of a pattern emerging, and I mentioned kind of an interview in the book with Vanilla Ice and Patrick Bet-David, when Vanilla Ice actually makes a good point about how, when you look at the 80s and the 90s, there was a specific culture and groove to the West. I'm not talking kind of about other cultures here, but particularly in the West. And there was a certain dress sense, a certain, funky way of music, and, it was really a lot of things. It was a very creative period of time, not just the 80s and 90s, obviously the 70s and the 60s. But there was a particular culture. But then when we get to the 2000s, once we get computers coming in, the internet, smartphones, especially with smartphones and social media, we're starting to develop this kind of culture of sameness all around the world because we're all watching the same things, we're all consuming the same information, and it's kind of having an impact on traditional cultures and also in the West as well.
Yes. Again, as you mentioned, the culture is supposed to represent the time and the environment of that immediate the time period that we're talking about.
Yep.
So up until 90s, it was very strong because in the 90s it was almost like the golden time period of our culture, especially in the creative sense. There's a very creative music and movies and TV series. That's all reflecting that very period of time, what was going on in the society around the world. So that was all reflecting through the 90s culture.
Yep.
But again, the culture now seemed to be transported into digital world.
Yes.
Again, since 2000s, with all these digital devices available, and since the social media came to our hands on the phone, everything kind of changed.
Yep.
Again, I remember when this brother and sister came to Australia to work, so I met them as colleagues. And they're from Indonesia, so I've never actually met someone who are from Indonesia. So again, I always wanted to travel to that country, but I never got to. But so I was really curious to know them personally and also their background and culture. But when it comes to the free time and the break time or something, and they're on the phone, and they're just dead silent. Then I was quite disappointed, and I was a little bit shocked actually. Even people coming from Indonesia, which is very different culture and very different tradition, still on the smartphone and looking at the same thing as what everyone else does in this country, right? So I was very disappointed. So again, the development of the sameness around the world is making the world a kind of a very dull and boring.
Yeah. And the culture is technology, right? That dull, boring culture is technology. If you hear people's conversations in modern day, if you hear what they are excited about, it's all to do with technology. It's all to do with what's on their phone. It's all to do with what's on their computer. And you think, but there's all of this life out here.
Yeah.
You and I were at a restaurant yesterday. actually, it was an outdoor sort of eatery, like a kind of like a food court. And, you know, I was mentioning to you, have a look around, and not one person was not on their phone. They're all on their phone. And you and I don't have a smartphone, so we're just sitting there, you know, just conversing.
Yeah.
And it's just quite shocking, and as you said, disappointing. And, you know, and to speak to a little bit about the 90s culture a little bit, I know an Indian individual who's a fan of the WWE. And not just this individual, there's a bunch of people all around the world of the younger generation. So they're in their teens, they're in their early 20s. And they like the WWE now, right? The World Wrestling Entertainment. But they find themselves watching YouTube clips of the late 90s. And they resonate with that time. And it's much more interesting. The show is much more interesting. There's actually a lot of creative juices flowing in that time. But if you look at now, it's riddled with political correctness. It's not willing to, you know, to make a stand on its own.
Yes.
And so once you are riddled with political correctness and you are self-censoring yourself, then creativity is inhibited.
Yeah.
And this is why I always tell people, don't self-censor yourself. Because as soon as, it doesn't matter what views you have, maybe your view, even as wacky as it may be, it may contribute to the betterment of humanity, but it also is a pure expression of your own art.
Yeah.
And so the problem is, as we were mentioning with political correctness, this is part of the sameness that is developing, right? So modern culture is basically these days mechanically based on a practical philosophy of life, which is kind of cloaked in the illusion of progress. So people often talk about progress these days, but then when you look at art and you look at creativity, you go, no, well, it's not really progressing because people are filtering their art through political correctness and they're self-censoring themselves. So it's not really like...
It's kind of, we can't be honest with ourselves anymore.
No.
We can't express our honest emotions anymore.
Exactly.
We always have to self-censor ourselves. And you have to kind of make an image of yourself to see if that sounds better, if it sounds politically correct or something like that. Whereas, again, in the 90s, there is that realness about it. Realness meaning here is to be able to express what you feel and what you think of things, and you can just express it honestly without any filter. That's realness. But again, we've lost it all. That is why people are watching 90s things.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I like what Quentin Tarantino said when he was asked about, you know, how come you don't sort of succumb to political correctness and cancel culture and this, and he's like, I don't listen to that. I make what I want to make, and that's why his art has stood the test of time. And it's a great thing because he just said, I think he was being interviewed by Bill Maher, and he said, who are they actually? So you're giving credit to this online mob of people who just gang up on people and bully them. This is what cancel culture is, right? And so you're giving them the power, because once you begin to self-censor, you've kind of become a coward.
Yes.
Because you've let them push you around. And this is one of my big problems with cancel culture, is that when you and I grew up, right, there was a big focus on anti-bullying, because being bullied is not a good thing.
Of course not.
And now the strange thing is that the media, the governments, and the tech companies all support bullying. They support you ganging up on one individual and bullying them, and it's just stupid. Like it's immature, it's cowardly, and that's what we're teaching our younger generation. Oh yeah, when someone speaks out of turn or it doesn't resonate with your subjective viewpoint, you make sure you gang up on them. So we did a lot of effort, especially particularly within the 80s and 90s, of anti-bullying. Not to do that, you know, like to accept people's differences, and even if they have wacky viewpoints, it doesn't have to bother you.
Yes.
You can just move on, and you don't have to be so sensitive and make a comment about everything. Digital technology is teaching people to comment on everything, having their 2 cents on everything, even if they don't know the individual.
Yes.
And obviously most people don't know the people who are on social media. So, you know, we're creating this kind of artificial culture, right? So, and when you have a culture like that that's politically correct, you have a modern culture with no edge, no groove. It just has nothing. It's empty. And humans become then robotic.
Yeah, very much so. You lose your own sense of creativity, obviously,
Yeah.
because you're not free to express whatever you feel, and that's the seed of real creativity.
Exactly.
And now that is pretty much gone.
I mentioned in the book to stink of Zen, right? In Zen Buddhism. So political correctness, being too pious, it has a stench to it. In Zen Buddhism, they say you never should be too pious and this and that because it has a certain stench and it's too contrived.
That's why with a certain type of movies and even advertisement, when I get to see certain things, I can, without that sort of a political correctness way of thinking, if I was to watch these things innocently, that I could take it with an open mind. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, everything is so based on being PC. So you can see through these things, their motivation, what their motivation is, through art.
Yeah.
Art is supposed to be art.
Yeah, exactly.
Art doesn't have motivation. Motivation meaning you have an ulterior agenda that you want to, impose on people through your art. That's not art. No. That's political media, really. That's what it is. That's way too stinky.
Yeah. And political correctness, again, is people don't understand. It's a moving thing. So political correctness is always about the moral flavors of that time. So the moral flavors of the political correctness in the 80s is different to the moral flavors that of now.
Yeah.
Actually, they're way more wacky now, the moral flavors of the moment. But it's a moving phenomenon. It's not set in stone.
No.
And so people who succumb to political correctness don't consider that like, oh, well, my political correctness now will be different when I'm 50. And it's like, well, isn't there something fundamentally wrong with your political correctness then? You are being moved by the trends of the time.
Right.
So that's not a solid thing. It's not something that is set in stone. So even your political correctness now, you may look back on it when you're 50 and go,
It'll
actually, I was stupid back when I was 40. We all know this. And so in the book, I discuss this at length. And we'll move on to the next part, which kind of coincides with the first section, actually. All work and no play is killing us. And I go into the cognitive science of this. So in cognitive science, for those who don't know cognitive science, we have the cold cognition, which is in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And that's kind of your decision maker. It's how you discern between this and that. It's the cognitive control centers. It's where you think of yourself. I'm Jason. I'm Guy Young. And that's how you decide. That's how you navigate through life, through this prefrontal cortex. But it's just that it's like an element of self-awareness that is just like a decision maker. It's your intellect, and so forth. But then we have the hot cognition, which is the primary aspect, you could say, of the brain, because it's the larger portion of the brain, which houses the unconscious, the subconscious, the naturalness of the world. So how I know how to do this with my hand, I don't have to think about this. It's how we become highly skilled at things. It's how we learn. It's how we can speak language effortlessly with having to think about the language. So this prefrontal cortex is kind of, you use this to try and learn language, but then it becomes hot.
Yes.
And so it's effortless then. And so both parts of the brain are important, but we emphasize too much on this part of the brain. It becomes the emphasis, and we do that in education. And so when we overtrain the cold cognition, we lose our sense of fun and play, because that's all in hot cognition. Yeah. You don't have to think about having fun and play, right? Spontaneity is a big thing in the hot cognition, because that's where all spontaneity comes from. When you are an artist, for example, I know this being a writer, that most of the great things that I write are from a spontaneous place. It's not me being Jason thinking about it. I've removed the cold cognition out of the way to allow something deeper within myself to speak.
Yeah. Again, hot cognition before digital device was developed, I think, a very healthy way. because in a way that, like you were saying, we go out and play with the mud and the plants, and you're run around with friends, and like that's how you like organically have fun, right?
Yep.
So you develop how to interact with one another,
Yep.
and also you develop to have this healthy emotional responses, right? But nowadays, because we are so much in connection with the digital world, yes, we become more robotic, mechanical, and analytical, right?
Yeah.
From what we see, but what that affects to the younger people, and also does matter the age, the adults as well, is that hot cognition is still functioning while you are looking at you being active on the digital devices. But what that does is that emotional training is not healthy.
No.
Little things get triggered it triggers your emotional responses, but because it's kind of you are locked into your own mind while you're on the digital devices, your hot cognition becomes to develop not unhealthy way, so that you not be able to have a good communication skill with one another. You are not in good control of your own emotional responses, right? That is also another big problem.
It is a big problem. Your brain is basically a mashed potato from the digital technology.
Yeah.
So as you said, your emotional responses aren't clean, aren't healthy.
Yeah.
Your whole mind is turned into chaos.
Yeah.
Because first of all, it's not healthy to be on something that like the phone for hours and hours on end every day for every year.
Yes.
It's not healthy. And we're seeing the detriment of this in humanity at large, where people are becoming too radicalized, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But when you're too, we become too focused on cognitive intelligence as opposed to emotional and moral intelligence.
Yes.
So we often think that intelligence itself is just cognitive intelligence in the prefrontal cortex, but our moral sensibilities and our emotional cognition are all from the hot cognition.
Yes.
And so when we put ourselves into overtraining the cold cognition, as you were alluding to, we lose our connection somewhat to our emotional and moral intelligence. And technology does this. This begins in education, but then overlay technology on top, and you're constantly training your cold cognition. And so when your emotional responses are not clean, I mean, it causes chaos online. It's a no-brainer, right? Like I speak about, in the book, I speak about like in South Korea and China, I use those two places as an example with both of their rote learning. What happens is you're constantly training the cold cognition, and then you're developing young people, and actually, as we know, where you're from, South Korea, you're developing adults who don't have a good connection to their body. They don't have a good connection to their ways of reading the environment, reading social cues. And this is what is happening. And this is, again, when you overlay technology on top, you're enhancing that.
Yes.
So people then can't act efficaciously with the environment around them, you know, and that's happening all around the world. I use China and South Korea as an example because the education is so strict in those two countries. But it's happening all around the world with technology in hand.
That's why when we go to Asian countries, like and people actually, the Chinese, Korean, or Japanese, any Asian people in Australia as well, that when you are around those people, that you find how physically unaware they are. Like you just get to, people bump into each other, and it seemed to be somewhat rude for the people who don't know much about the Asian, Far Eastern Asian people. But because they're so, like, the way of thinking is so intellectual and so focused in the one thing, even the way they think itself, it cannot be well-rounded. And also that reflects their physical state as well. It's physically, they're not aware whether people are coming from this way or that way, and they stay in the middle of it, right? Like, and we see that a lot.
I remember when we were living in Seoul, and I would go on for a train trip somewhere around Seoul and come home, and I'd be blown out because I'd be in the train station. I should wear shoulder pads because even old grandmas are coming along and sinking the shoulder, and I'm like,
left, right,
what's
center.
going on around here? Like, and I'd come home to you and go, I got shoulder charged by a bunch of old ladies. Is this common? You know?
Yeah. Yes, it is. I guess.
So, but that's what happens, right? When like you said, when you make a society or you train individuals too intellectually, you lose connection with that immediate environment and the sensibilities of other people and so forth and so on. Hence, what's happening with technology. Technology is doing the same thing, and then people go online and they start arguing and don't understand the sensibilities of other people. It's a dangerous game.
And that is why the world becomes so serious, isn't it? Like people overly serious, and people are overly sensitive about certain topics to say it, correctly. And that is all because of overusing our cold cognition without the emotional response.
Yep.
Without being, to try to be too politically correct.
Yep.
Yeah, so being seriousness again, it rids of the funness of society, comical value in life. We can't have a laugh freely anymore, almost, right?
Yeah.
That world became way too serious, which isn't natural to all of us.
And so when you suppress the hot cognition, is because the hot cognition is our nature, right? That's our inherent nature, and so when you suppress that, and you only train this through technology and through education, is that you begin to discern between what is right and wrong according to a morality that is not natural, but instead is stinky. It stinks of Zen, as PC. And so that's what happens. So we begin to filter our experience through that. So our subjective experience of right and wrong is filtered through that stinky morality. And it's not it's only because we have suppressed our whole cognition, as you were mentioning. You can't have fun, and certain things become too serious that you can't talk about them, and then you have all of this insanity then in the culture where certain things to speak about are taboo, but you're allowed to speak about some things, but you can't speak about other things, right? Look at like how ridiculous the race argument has got, particularly in America, right? Like if you mention that racism exists against white people, which it does, you're not even allowed to say that. And so that's how ridiculous the culture gets. Racism is racism no matter how much no matter how you look at it.
Yeah.
And even we all know that the concept of white people is a silly concept because there's numerous races within that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's a silly argument, but that's what happens when the culture becomes descends into a form of insanity that you can't even have a civil conversation about sensitive topics. And you mentioned just one thing. Like I remember you and I in a podcast once, we mentioned Jordan Peterson, and then all in the comments there was a bunch of people going, "Oh, I know you two are scum for mentioning his name." It's like, it's just a person, like
just an
individual. Like,
right.
What makes you so angry about that? And so that's what's really sad. You can't even mention some things without the mob coming and attacking you and bullying you. And so that's the ridiculous thing about it, right?
Yes.
And so when we fall into that sort of behavior, then we begin to mimic machines inside of our head and we lose our sense of innocence, So
again, we become machine-like.
We become
robotic.
machine-like,
Yeah. Again, which is completely the opposite to our real nature, true nature.
Yeah, of course. So we move into the next section where I speak about organic intelligence as complex. And this kind of backs up on what we were saying, because the way that we are being trained, right, is mainly through cold cognition.
Yeah.
So we think intelligence is based on just this part of the brain.
Yeah. Basically, just be a robot.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember once at a satsang, someone was speaking to Sadhguru and was making fun of the rural people.
Oh.
And, you know, Sad, so he comes down hard when he hears this sort of nonsense. And he's like, their level of intelligence is different than yours. They have an intelligence with nature, an intelligence of how to farm.
Mm.
Do you have that? You are saying that cognitive intelligence is on a pedestal, and natural intelligence, emotional, moral are all just in the bin.
While without those farmers in the rural area, he doesn't have food to eat.
Touche.
And he doesn't know how to grow.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. And so why I mention about organic intelligence is complex in the book is I'm speaking a lot here about AI. And I get into AI and transhumanism a lot and try to weigh in on the debate, so to speak, that a lot of the people in the AI field have.
for me personally, there's so many interesting parts in this book, but I think for me personally, this artificial intelligence section is, I think, a core of makes up like a most important part of the book, I think personally. Because the reason why is because people, if not everyone, most people are so much of an advocate of this technology. Everyone loves technology and everyone defends technology. But this is the counter argument for that.
Yep.
Why it isn't actually.
Yes. Yeah, and I tackle this AI part from a different perspective too, as a philosopher and someone who teaches Eastern spirituality. I'm looking at it from more of the perspective of consciousness and how the mind works, which I feel actually a lot of people in the AI field don't have a lot of knowledge on. Maybe they reach out to quantum physicists or other people like that, but I don't feel like they have a lot of understanding of how intelligence actually is.
Yeah.
So I often hear in the AI field, a lot of them speak about self-awareness. What if the AI robot becomes self-aware? So in saying that, you're saying self-awareness, being aware, but you have no emotions, no self-interest. It's just pure self-awareness. Why would then the AI robot want to take over humanity and this and that?
Yes.
And so this is why I get into the idea that, well, not the idea, the reality that organic intelligence is complex, right? So we can't just think about the prefrontal cortex. We have to think about emotions themselves, because emotions themselves drive self-awareness. And, you know, we can't live in scientific denial when it comes to how and why intelligence springs forth from biological organisms.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that a lot of people, the scientists, don't understand. Like, within an organic human body, emotions and thoughts and feelings arise from an organic biological being.
Yes. I got this sentence out of directly from the book. You're saying a cognitive intelligence is useless without emotional, moral, social, creative, and psychosomatic intelligence.
Yes.
Which is a direct connection with our senses.
Yep.
Having this again biological organic form of this body, right?
Yep.
So we feel things through our nervous system. What's solid, what's soft, what's liquidy, all these things, and what's tasty and what's not tasty.
Yep.
And everything. We feel gravity through our senses, everything. All these psychosomatic organism contributes to have the intelligence that we have. So how is it possible for AI to possess the same kind of intelligence? Again, as you said, self-awareness itself could be possible. But that self-awareness that we talk about as human being to AI might not be the same thing. And it can't be the same thing. Because machine only functions through certain programming, which is from human brain, obviously. So they don't have the nervous system. They don't have emotions, obviously. They can have emotions. Again, that could only be implanted by program.
Yeah.
Right.
But like the emotions are not. Again, emotions are so intrinsic to biological life. Like, could they? My argument in the book is like, could they really have emotions?
Yes.
Because if you're only talking about self-awareness, you're talking just about a decision-making machine. So that would be like humans only having the cold cognition. That's the kind of analogy I use in the book. So if we only had the cold cognition, move this, move that.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's no motivation to do anything because, as you mentioned with that quote, like, you know, emotional, social, creative, and moral intelligence drive cognitive intelligence, drive self-awareness. You see? So your emotional intelligence, for example, drives moral agency, and our morality drives our rationality. So if you're talking about self-awareness, you're talking about a robot being rational about this and that. But rationality itself is driven by emotions, which fuel moral agency, which drive your rationality.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like you said with emotions, like, could you upload emotions to a robot? Well, I mean, you could program it to be a certain way, but it would only have that particular emotions, because emotions themselves grow and subside. That's how they work in a biological organism, which drive our sense of self-awareness, or you know, drive our experience of self-awareness. But if you take those emotions, because we'll discuss why it is impossible to upload consciousness into a machine a bit later. But if you take those out of the equation, then you've just got a decision-making machine. Because, you know, again, self-awareness doesn't imply intelligence. It's only a level of intelligence. It's not complete intelligence. And intelligence itself is grown out of the universe naturally. It's organic. It's a natural byproduct of biological life. So how can you replicate that then? If it's a natural byproduct of biological life, how could you replicate emotions and this and that? Self-awareness, okay, we have machines that are self-aware even now. They do things for us in a way because they are programmed. Self-awareness is programmed to do this.
To do certain things.
Yeah. The conversation should be more about self-interest, not self-awareness. Because once the machines become self-interested, then that's a different conversation. But again, self-interest implies emotions, personality, a lot of things driving it.
What motivates self-interested itself is coming from that biological organism.
Exactly.
And again, like machine can replicate cold cognitive functions, again, under certain programming and got programmed to do certain things and making decisions. But in human life, that cold cognitive function is actually originated from hot cognitive function.
Yes.
As we've been mentioning, the senses, emotional reactions, and all these things. All these things are unconscious, and that is hot cognitive functions.
Yep.
And these hot cognitive functions reinforce to make certain decisions. So not cold cognitive function affecting hot, it's actually the other way. And it can only happen the other way, right? For example, there is you have a margarita pizza and there is a garlic pizza, for example. You prefer margarita pizza over garlic pizza because it's a hot because that's the conclusion that you come to with the cold cognitive function.
Yeah.
But what's liking that more than the other is from your hot cognitive function, which is our senses, right?
Yeah.
So without our emotion and senses, there is no hot cognitive function, cold cognitive function.
There's no cognitive, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the cold cognition is decision maker.
Yeah.
The reason why, as humans, we evolved, part of evolution was the cold cognition, was when we were on the savannah, when we came down from the trees, we had to navigate the tricky terrain. And as a human species, to lions and elephants and tigers and this and that, we are at a distinct disadvantage. So we need something. And so what happened over thousands and thousands and thousands of years was a development of this cold cognition, which is a decision maker. But again, as you said, the original mind is the hot cognition, and that is driving our perspective of how we should actually navigate through this tricky environment.
Yes.
And this is part of the big part of this part of the book, this AI part of the book.
Yes.
That's why I kind of mentioned that there's a hard problem in the AI field, because how is it possible to create emotions if they are intrinsically bound to organic life?
That's it.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
We can talk about self-awareness, and they only do talk about self-awareness.
Yes.
You can talk about self-awareness all day long. Yeah, self-awareness. Okay, I'm aware. I see things. I'm aware of things around me.
Yes.
You're talking. You should be talking more about artificial consciousness, not artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Because consciousness itself encapsulates emotions, feelings, etc.
Yeah.
But you're only talking about artificial intelligence, and you're only talking about it from a perspective of cognitive intelligence, not emotional or moral or social or creative. And so I mentioned in the book about how Elon Musk, to speak to what we were talking about, he believes that we are creating a limbic system for future AI. And he believes that like our desires, our fears and fantasies, etc., are going into Google servers, for example, and this is building the limbic system for AI, which would give rise to emotions, behavior, memory, etc. But I argue in the book that this is not possible considering the limbic system's relationship to the nervous system. So you'd have to imply then that the AI machine has a nervous system, because limbic system is intrinsically connected to the nervous system.
Yes.
I mean, that's you can't take one away from the other and think
No.
think that it's going to work. So my question is, how would a limbic system function without influencing the endocrine system and the autonomic nervous system? We can't even think of that. And so are these the questions that people are asking in the AI field? I don't know, because I don't work in the AI field. But I understand consciousness and the psychosomatic organism through the practices in that I practice. And so, like, how is it possible? How could you have a limbic system?
Your limbic system and all this nervous system, they go together, and only that way it can do what it does.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Not just taking we'll build a limbic system through this, and let's see how it responds. It doesn't really work like that.
No.
Well, that is why we call it machine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course. Again, modern science is kind of handicapped by not thinking about things holistically. And so when you're looking at the human body, you have to look at it holistically, because things go together. You can't just pull one thing out. And I know Western medicine is kind of based on that. Like, we'll just attack this part while you'll neglect every other part of the body, which is detrimental, obviously. So you have to think about the human organism in a whole, not just like we'll take this part out and we're just going to put the limbic system in the thing, in the machine. And it's like, but that's not going to work, because you don't have the autonomic nervous system, you don't have the endocrine system. How is that actually going to function without those? Yeah. And so maybe they need to be thinking about some sort of synthetic AI thing, not really a machine, like some sort of clone maybe. I don't know if that's possible. But where Musk is right is that there is an AI brain developing, growing. But it's not how we envision. No.
In its own computing systemic way.
Yes.
It's not like replicating human brain as just AI as AI.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned in the book that the AI brain is growing. It's built on machine learning of behavior, right? Through social media companies and Google and so forth. But that's all done for financial gains. It's not done for anything else. It's done for financial goals. Sure, they would want to develop more and more. We see this with metaverse and things of that nature. But if you take the financial goals out of it, then they wouldn't even care about any of that.
Yeah. Again, their version of AI is all to collect data of our behavior online, what we like, what we dislike, where we like to go, what we like to do, what we like to eat, all these information, collecting these information over each individual and try to make it profitable through their platform. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, as I said, what AI truly want is artificial consciousness. They don't want artificial intelligence. Because I mentioned an example in the book that when you look at artificial grass as opposed to real grass, you can tell that that's artificial grass. And the same way, if an AI machine had self-awareness, you're going to be able to tell it's a robot as opposed to a human. So, again, rationality on its own without emotional indicators is only a decision maker. That's all it is a decision maker. Which, ironically, is usually based on regulating emotions.
Yeah.
Do you see?
Yep.
So what would it be without regulating emotions?
Yeah.
It'd just be like a calculator.
Yeah.
It's ironic, isn't it? So the AI machine in the end would just be a rational machine. So without spontaneity, without hot cognition. Cold cognition is stationary, as I mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
So we move on to the next section, which actually backs up on that one, where we talk about transhumanism and uploading. Is it possible to upload consciousness into a machine? Now, this kind of transhumanist debate became famous through Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near. A fascinating read. And I, as I discuss in the book, I personally don't resonate with those sorts of views, and I actually use the Kali Yuga in the book as an example to talk about transhumanism, but we won't discuss that today. So the whole point of Ray's work is about, like, can we integrate with machines, with AI? Can we upload our consciousness and live forever?
Like that movie, the Transcendence with the Johnny Depp.
Exactly. Just like that, yeah. And for everything that we just discussed previous, it's almost impossible. But we actually have scientists now who are coming out and speaking about how it's almost impossible too. Because I mentioned in the book, Korean scientist and quantum physicist Daejun Song, how he explains that it's not possible. It's not possible to upload consciousness.
Yes.
And Song, he published a intriguing paper called The Non-Computability of Consciousness. So he goes at length to prove why consciousness can never be computed or programmed. And so through quantum computer research, the conclusion was that it's basically a mathematical problem, he was saying. And a lot of people have read this paper, but a lot of people who want to keep their head in the sand ignore the evidence that he has shown.
Yeah.
And so I'll read just a brief part of that section of what Song was saying, and a little bit of what I say as well. So Song says, among conscious activities, the unique characteristic of self-observation cannot exist in any type of machine, Song explains. And this is me speaking. So he was able to show how a conscious state can be precisely and fully represented in mathematical terms in certain situations, similar to how an atom and electron can be fully described mathematically. This is important considering neurobiological and computational approaches to brain research have only provided approximations at best. In representing consciousness mathematically, Song's research provides evidence that consciousness is not compatible with a machine. His findings and a host of other research on consciousness lead us to believe, for now, that consciousness is not part of a physical system like neurons and atoms. Song says, if consciousness cannot be represented in the same way all other physical systems are represented, it may not be something that arises out of a physical system like the brain, said Song. Song goes even further, giving us all food for thought. Song says, the brain and consciousness are linked together, but the brain does not produce consciousness. Consciousness is something altogether different and separate. The math doesn't lie. And there's a lot of food for thought in that one. And that part there where he mentions at the end, the brain and consciousness are linked together, but the brain does not produce consciousness. Consciousness is something altogether different and separate. The math doesn't lie. That leads into the idea of pure consciousness in Eastern spirituality. And so then what do they actually want to upload into these AI robots? Because scientists don't understand, as I said, the mind as deeply as the sages and those scholars before us in the Eastern philosophical traditions. Do they want to upload pure consciousness, or do they want to upload ego and personality?
Yes.
And it really appears that what they are speaking about is the eternal perspective of their ego, or their ego living for eternity, is what they're talking about, as opposed to understanding that it's pure consciousness actually that is eternal. The ego and the personality are temporary, and so they really want to upload their personality. But personality and the ego arise out of pure consciousness. And as people know from listening and watching our podcast for a long time, the goal in Eastern spirituality is to downregulate the ego and personality to get back to the pure consciousness. And so I find that interesting, because the transhumanists themselves don't want to upload pure consciousness. They want to upload their ego.
Yes, the ego, the artificial, the identity.
Yeah. So they assume consciousness is just in the prefrontal cortex. That's their perspective, as what we've discussed earlier.
So again, like in the book, as you mentioned, from Song's study, saying the brain and the consciousness are linked, but brain doesn't produce consciousness. So, okay, so then brain doesn't produce consciousness, then the question should be, then what is consciousness? Then from what you were saying, then that these are people who supporting the idea of AI and transhumanism might not have a deeper and thorough understanding of what real consciousness is. That's how I could come up with. They don't have what, again, ego and the personality can only come from that pure consciousness. Then what is consciousness?
Yeah.
Then the only conclusion is that what they want to upload is their personality and ego.
Yeah. They want to be Guy Young forever. Guy Young as a person.
I get it, as it sounds so mechanical. It would be possible in a robot form, but it will never be human.
Yeah. Well, it would never be Guy Young either, because of everything we mentioned before.
Yeah, exactly.
And like you said, with this hard problem in AI with consciousness, is that, as I said, they assume that the consciousness is just in the prefrontal cortex. The cold cognition. So they don't consider hot cognition. So when you talk about hot cognition, you're talking about the unconscious, the subconscious, your motor skills, your ability to retain knowledge and express it without thinking about it. All of these things. Spontaneity. And so on top of this, with the hot cognition, is how our nervous system takes in experience. That itself is an extension of consciousness.
Yes.
So your nervous system is an extension of consciousness. You take in experience and then it transforms your way of thinking. And so they're not taking all of these components into how consciousness would operate within a
within
robot.
a machine, yeah.
And so if you're talking about uploading consciousness on its own, pure consciousness, first pure consciousness would have to be located within the body.
Yes.
And it's not.
It has to be something material.
Yeah, something material, yeah. And then their argument would be, well, let's just pull the nervous system and everything and put it all in. And it's like, well, all of that depends on other biological systems.
Exactly.
Depends on your liver, your kidney,
Yes.
how good's your heart running.
Yes, that's right.
It's not, you can't just pull your nervous system out and put the nervous system nothing without the heart and the lungs and so forth and so on. And so it's a very complicated subject that I don't think a lot of the transhumanists and the AI and people in the AI field actually think too deeply about. And I think a lot of their problems come from the next section, which we will talk about, which is a lot of the technological philosophy is based on mind-body dualism.
Yes.
Which is the kind of intrinsic perspective of Western/Christian cognition.
Yeah.
So what has basically developed, particularly in Europe since the time of the Enlightenment period. But even before that, right? So you have this idea that you are this body lugging around this you are this mind lugging around this completely irrational body. So you're a rational mind lugging this meat suit around. So there's this constant perspective of mind-body dualism.
Yes.
And that affects the AI people and the transhumanists about how they think about the artificial intelligence, because they think that their mind is something different than biological life. And look, as we discussed, pure consciousness is not located in the body, but the mind and the ego and the personality that arise in pure consciousness.
Yes.
So they operate from this disembodied myth, as opposed to the East, who have the perspective of mind-body holism. So the body is the brain.
Yes, that's right. It includes what body feels itself is the intelligence, part of intelligence, the part of consciousness.
Yes, yes. So that's what we're talking about, right? Like, you can't take one thing out of the body and think that that's going to be the fuel of some sort of other machine.
Well, just like Western medicine and Eastern medicine, for instance. Like Eastern medicine is something that just massaging your palm is affecting your kidneys and livers, and they do.
Yeah.
Like
It's
when
all
you
linked.
feel you have a food poisoning or some organ problem, then when you do massage your palms and your toes, things do get better.
Yeah.
I mean, over time, it's not like a cut and fix kind of a Western medicinal way.
Yeah.
But again, they come from the holistic thinking, whereas the Western medicine is, as you mentioned earlier, you just attack this problem or just attack that problem. That's why people had a lot of side effects from taking pharmaceutical drugs,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Like, for instance, antidepressant pills, for example. Like people take it just to feel not too anxious and whatnot. But then what that does suppresses your nervous system,
Yep.
and your brain, your head is foggy, and you kind of lose ability to think sharply and this and that. And what the usually Western medicine does is that you become addicted to it. So that there's too much of a side effect. So that is to show that is a clear evidence of how this disembodied myth, the mind-body dualism, is coming from the Western way of thinking.
Yeah, and affecting the way scientists and that think about transhumanism and artificial intelligence.
Yes.
So in the next section we're going to speak about the algorithm is transforming your mind without your permission. This should be a no-brainer, but as we find with the social media algorithms, is particularly in the last, let's say 5 years, they have begun to radicalize people, really radicalize people, making people ideological and not contributing to peace and harmony within humanity. And I don't know why Well, I do know why certain governments don't regulate them, obviously because they make a lot of money for the governments, but they should be regulated, and there needs to be, someone has to draw a line in the sand with these tech companies, right? So, as I said, it's radicalizing everyone. Everyone is, not everyone, but a lot of people make everything into an ideology. Diet, race, religion, anything. You name it, turtles becomes an ideology. Whatever the algorithm is driving and whatever innocent, susceptible minds consume.
Well, that is to say the algorithm is only supporting dramas and controversies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Just, and again, the social media exposing so many different ideas that people have, right? And the people who get to see these different ideas run with their own imagination, and these ideas become ideology, and the ideology runs wild, and people become radical, becoming extremist.
Yeah,
right?
they become extremists, yeah.
And people being extremists bring a lot of attention and bring a lot of conflicts, a lot of social problems, obviously. So it creates dramas, just like how news network always reporting the negative news.
Yep.
That's how they get the viewership.
Yep.
It works just like the same, and that's how algorithm also operates.
Yeah. 100%.
Unfortunately, yeah.
That's right. That's right. When we look at Taoism, for example, Taoism is a system to be free from ideology and be natural. You know, without turning everything into without turning actually Taoism into an ideology. That's the core point. Some people will turn it to an ideology, right? So it's a technology to be free from ideology itself, because ideology itself is what sort of causes division amongst people in the world. But the algorithm is supporting that sort of way of ideological thinking. And so then you have all of these people in all of these separate groups now. And when you have people like you and I who aren't affiliated with any group, and we're just kind of just chilling over here, you become like the black sheep, and you become an outcast in the society
Without you choosing it.
Yeah, without choosing it. You don't choose it. The people who are ideological choose it for you, because they associate overly with their religion, their race, their diet, their dog, I don't know, and everything that they overly identify with. And as Lao Tzu points out, when you are an ideologue, when you are infected with all of these ideological ways of thinking, you forget what it is to be naturally human, because you're just wound up in the concepts you have in your mind, or the information you've been spoon-fed from the algorithm.
Yes.
And so you lose what it is to be natural.
Yeah, they see such a divisive perspective 24/7.
Yeah.
And they like to compartmentalize everything, so they think accordingly. And in that way, you can only create more division and conflicts within those different groups.
Yeah.
And again, these even groups, it's just kind of funny, but these groups think differently. People do think differently.
Yeah.
You don't have to be in conflict with one another and create ideology and become a radicalist and bloody extremist. We don't have to be like that. We just need to acknowledge how people think differently. That's all we need.
100%. Social media is making people too insecure and too sensitive and too weak, actually. Because once you start to believe that we all think the same, I mean, that's just a ridiculous thing. Be confident and secure in yourself that people think differently, and it's a beautiful thing. Accept it's a beautiful thing.
Exactly.
Oh, but that person thinks like this. Doesn't matter. Is it the end of the world? Is that person going to do anything to you? And just because they think differently, it should not affect your life. That is a sign of insecurity, and you have a low self-esteem.
Yeah.
So you want them to think like you. Be confident that people think differently, no matter how crazy they think, and move on with your life. And the thing is that this is how the algorithm, the AI brain of the algorithm is dumb, because the algorithm is showing too many loose connections with what people think. So like if they watch one video, say on Thailand travel, then they'll get a video that'll pop up on scams in Thailand and this.
Right.
And so the AI brain is dumb for the algorithm, because that person is not really interested in who is scamming someone in Thailand. They're interested in traveling Thailand. And this is how innocent people often, who have no interest in things like scams in Thailand, become radicalized. You see? They were innocently looking like, oh, I'm really interested in traveling Thailand. And next minute they start looking at scams in Thailand, which there aren't many. But then they become a person who fights scamming. And they would have never done that without the algorithm. Never.
Yes.
So it's just stupid. Anyway, so this leads into the next part that we'll speak about, which is digital addiction.
Yeah.
So we're leaving some of the juicy stuff for last here. And digital addiction is not really anything that people, well, maybe some people don't know about it, but I feel like it's pretty common these days. But it's like people who smoke cigarettes who know it's bad for them, but they choose not to do anything about it. That's where I'm dumbfounded, you know. So, but when we talk about addictions here, we're not talking about sort of chemical dependencies. We're talking more about behavioral addictions, but behavioral addictions resemble substance addictions in many ways.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't understand this. So I have a part here because psychology speak about how addictions need to be understood.
Yeah.
So this is the psychological perspective of how addictions need to be understood. Addiction is a condition in which a person engages in use of a substance or in a behavior for which the rewarding effects provide a compelling incentive to repeatedly pursue the behavior despite detrimental consequences. I remember you and I were living, I think, in India, and we saw a picture. India, they have a lot of counterfeit T-shirts and stuff like that, and there was a picture of Facebook written out in cocaine.
Yep.
And you and I already knew it was highly addictive for people, but I mean, it just represents perfectly, right, what social media has become.
So again, like the material, the chemical substance gets people in a certain state of hype, right? That's why people get addicted. So with this behavioral addiction with the digital world is that positive reinforcement and social approval, which is again we got to develop through our evolution, and people like to get lots of likes, lots of followers, right? And you get to have some sort of influence on people, that sort of feeling, right? That's what people get hooked on, really, right? That's the dopamine rush that people get. Lots of likes and lots of, I don't know, positive comments and whatnot, and people get addicted to that feeling. But that is also shows that how people are insecure on their own as well. Like people, if they get hooked on that sort of feelings from online platforms, that means that's how much they're insecure within themselves in the physical world.
Yeah, the real world, yeah.
Right? They're insecure and they're not okay with the way they are, and they nicely packed and manicured the way display on their social media profiles, and they get likes and this and that, and they get, they're happy with it,
Get that dopamine hit.
Yeah, So that's the behavioral addiction that we were talking about.
Yep.
And again, with the gaming and things like that for teenagers especially, I see it a lot. Nowadays there is a rehab for this in South Korea.
Yep.
And again, we know the sad story about this couple was addicted to this online game. You mentioned about this thing in the book, this story, very sad story. And they both got addicted to this game. And in the game, you have your own home, and you can have a family in the game. And they get addicted to this game, and they raise the infant daughter in the game while their real infant daughter is locked up in the house and end up dying of starvation.
Yep.
And that's just like...
Madness.
That's just not right. It's just something is really gone wrong here.
Yeah. The mother used to go back every 3 hours or something to check on their real daughter and feed her. And then there was one day they must have been engrossed in the game. They had a big session, and then
Big session.
it's just insanity, isn't it? So they were more concerned about raising their digital daughter as opposed to the real world. And so, you and I, we are people who just call a spade, and that's just not on, And I know that a lot of people like to defend technology and this and that.
No.
When you understand addiction and you understand that this is going on and it's affecting particularly young kids, I mean, we got to really address this problem.
Yes.
We really have to address this problem. And look, behavioral addictions are moderate, right, compared to chemical dependencies. We're not saying that they're exactly the same, but the motivation is the same.
Yes.
First of all, with a behavioral addiction, you don't suffer from withdrawals. You might feel a bit bored or agitated because you're not scrolling the Twitter feed, but getting out of that habit of positive reinforcement and social approval is actually a very healthy thing. This is why people, when they go to monasteries or ashrams, and they're so far away from society, and there's obviously no technology allowed in those places, a lot of people say it's the greatest time of their life because they have this great sense of freedom where they don't have to appeal to anyone, they're not judged by anyone. All you've got to do is sit, close your eyes and meditate and understand yourself deeply.
Yes.
And it's very liberating.
Very liberating, and also the empowering of being who you truly are.
Yeah.
Really.
Really is.
Yeah.
So this leads into the last section we'll speak about, which is the debt is suicide. So from digital addiction, succumbing to these silly algorithms, the debt is suicide. We're talking about kids here.
Yeah.
Obviously, adults suffer from this as well. There's numerous adults who have committed suicide because of
Yes.
the smartphone and social media and this and that, for which the tech companies take no responsibility. But when we look at the trends, and I mentioned this in a chapter in the book about since the application of social media on smartphones, you see an exponential growth in both suicides of teen boys and girls, but especially teen girls.
Yes.
Some of the graphs with teen girls almost triple from 2012 when it became more of a common thing.
Yes.
And
there's that really sharp incline.
Yes. And so if you understand psychology, with boys and with men in particular, usually adult men aren't this bad, but it can still be with adult men, is that disputes are oftenly resolved with your fists, right? So boys are naturally more physically aggressive. With girls, we know it's more passive aggressive. We know it's more about disrupting social relationships, about tearing them down and backstabbing and gossip. We all know this. The thing is that in this insane world that we live in now, you can't even speak openly about these things. As Jordan Peterson, someone's triggered right now, right, by even mentioning his name, has he told that lady in that the BBC radio in the UK, he was just mentioning the data, and she was calling him,
like a sexist
and stuff like that. And it's like, but this is just the data. Again, that's the insane world we live in. Someone's already triggered right now, writing a comment to you and I. The same. So you can't talk about things openly and discuss it. But you and I aren't PC, so we don't give a crap what anyone thinks. So we just don't tell the truth as it is. And so the thing is with the teen girls is that, particularly as a teenage girl, there is that dichotomy, right? There is that environment where if you add, I actually quote Jonathan Haidt in this. He kind of says, so you have this dynamic with teen girls already, and then you add this thing called the smartphone with social media, and you go, here you go, girls, go at it.
Yeah. girls. Yeah,
Terrible. I mean, personally, you and I talk about this all the time. We couldn't have imagined being a teenager with social media.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how I would have survived. I just wouldn't have had it, I don't think.
It would be just too much, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, with the aggression, the boys and girls do have aggressions, just how they express it is different.
Exactly.
I think. As you said earlier, boys' aggression is expressed more like a physical sense. Almost maybe healthier in a way, because you'll definitely know who's angry and, who's aggressive.
You'll sort it out.
Yeah, you'll sort it out. You get into fist fight or whatnot. And in the end, the funny thing is boys matters do get sorted out that way between the boys.
Yep.
Their aggression expresses that way.
Yep.
But the girls' aggression expresses slightly different, because the girls, the females, are a bit more sensitive and emotional. So their aggression is exposed through like disrupting other girls' relationship, as you mentioned earlier. So they're like a little bit like behind the scene, how people like to chat behind their back.
Tear other people down.
Yeah, tear other people down. So like disrupting someone's reputation is kind of how they show the aggression towards somebody between girls, more so likely than the boys. Yeah. And I mean, social media is just for it. Like you said about Jonathan Haidt's words, like, "Hey girls, go hog wild, see what happens."
See what happens, yeah.
And again, the result of data doesn't lie. Again, data is data. We got to see it for what it is. It's not healthy. It's not good. And again, like a sensitive period of time, isn't it? Being a teenage
sensitive.
girls,
oh my God.
like, I mean, it can damage their
cognitive development.
Yes. Emotionally unstable. It can be like a trauma, and I think it already happened to many girls. I think, and
the data doesn't lie. Self-harm and suicide is like this.
It's insane.
It's like as opposed to it like being like this before that nonsense, social media
before
and
2014, yes, 2012. 2012.
Yeah, 2012 started to grow. 2014 started to grow exponentially.
Yeah, exponentially.
So you have to. This is and another part I put in the book is how social media should be 18 plus. Smartphones should be 18 plus. A lot of people will think, "Oh man, who's this guy?" But if you're thinking about the future of humanity and you understand these stats, you understand and these rates of suicide are growing every year. It's not slowing down.
No.
Not slowing down. It's getting worse.
Yes.
Because how evasive the algorithm gets, the more young people particularly don't have a discerning eye and are so affected by what other people say. As adults, you and I, we can kind of just go, "Oh, what an idiot," like to a comment and just delete it and block them and move on, because some people just have their own personal issues, right? Hurt people. So, but as a teenager, you don't have that perspective as an adult.
Yes.
And so why did we stop teenagers drinking back in the day and having drugs? Because it's a very important time of development. When you add in alcohol and this and that, you're adding in bad social behavior, you're adding in a lot of things that they don't really need. So why are we not looking at social media and smartphones as an addictive substance as well? And it's far worse.
100%.
Far worse in some sense.
I mean, not only social media, the content that you have online on your smartphone itself is quite harmful. It can be quite harmful for teenagers and adults.
Yep.
But having the device itself is, to me, I think is harmful, because what happens when you're on the phone, like just one touch, it does what you want it to do, right? It goes playing games or looking at some things in one touch. There is no kind of a process from getting from A to B, right? So if young people use use the smartphone for however long they use, they kind of get eliminated to learn how to do things from A to B, for example. Like, for example, if you want to achieve something, you need to put some sort of effort for a certain period of time. Are they gonna learn that easier? I mean, easier than using a digital device? Probably not. They don't have any opportunity to learn how to be patient and persevere. That's the problem I have. Because machine is a machine. Machine is designed to do what it does. Like click, 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 and done. They designed to do that function, right? But our brain don't work like that. But for children, they are developing the cognitive functions in the brain. So if they don't get exposed to learn how to do things with their own effort and learning to persevere and be patient, what kind of human beings are we producing, really?
Exactly.
But for adults, for us, we were born when there was no computer easily available. There was no internet, really, No. Internet was introduced to us when we became teenager, right? So we grew up without online world. We went out and run around the mud and playing with the kids in the playground, swimming in the river and whatnot. That was our play. But now is infant babies on the phone, a carton playing right in front of them. That's the age we are living. So it's very concerning that how are we going to produce such creative, innovating individuals in the future? Probably very, very at the least number. Because we need to learn to gain something through hard work. Without hard work, there's no fruit. No. And how are they going to learn these things, And then you try to force, as parents, you try to force these things to do for kids, but kids would want to be on the phone playing games all the time, right? I know what they would prefer to do, right?
Yeah, of course. So Gregory once said in a satsang that the new generation, it's the only time ever in history that the new generation are actually dumber than the older generations. Because usually, and Alan Watts actually talks about this, the younger generation always bring forth a new wisdom. But because of, like what you were mentioning, like you think about the damage that TikTok is having on the cognitive development of teenagers and younger than, because younger than teenagers are on that stupid crap too. And so your attention spans are dwindling to beneath a minute, your attention span. I don't even know if these children will be able to watch a movie when they get older or to read a book. I mean, the rates of children reading books has gone drastically down. Don't even mention adults. I mean, adults don't even read anymore at all. So when you read if someone sees you reading a book, they think you're a dinosaur. Like, what are you, from the 40s? And so you think about the damage that is doing. And that's why Sadhguru said that, is that if you have technology like that is destroying the mind of the youth, what can they produce, as you said? What are they going to innovate when they get older? Well, they'll just make things like probably new social media.
New app.
Like things that are just completely unnecessary. Yeah. And all of it speaks to when you're falling into this habit of social media and the smartphone, we're developing this new digital behavior, aren't we? Yeah. And this digital behavior is not healthy. And I remember when I unfortunately had to create social media accounts back when I published my first book back in 2011. The publisher said, you really need to have these. And you and I were like, oh, no. Anyway, we created it. And then the conversations on there that I had with people who read my work were just very pure, just like talking in the real world here.
Yes.
But then I noticed that we were living in Thailand at the time in 2014. I started, the conversation started to change. and people started to speak directly at me as if they knew me. And then, the kind of troll mentality started to develop.
Right.
And then it's just got further and further and further out of control in this present day. And so since you've had social media, especially in the smartphones, you've slowly had this new behavior develop. And it comes from the premise of how the internet should be, where you have anonymity, right? So you can be GY 4500.
Yeah.
Yeah. And no one really knows who you are. You can have a picture of a peanut on your profile, right? And so no one knows who you are. So you can just go guns a-blazing and just converse with people as you feel. And that sort of anonymity kind of makes you feel bulletproof. So this is a really new way of behaving and communicating. And it's really not contributing to a peaceful and harmonious world. Now, you and I, as people know, we are not for censorship. But if you are behaving in a way online, hiding behind a fake avatar, I mean, it also says a lot about your psychology, but it's not a healthy way that we should be behaving. Because the thing that I've never understood with the whole way people behave online is that why is there a particular way you behave online, but when you're in the real world, you behave normally. You watch your P's and Q's, you read facial expressions, you understand the nuance of society and how human beings are. But when you're in your basement with your Cheetos, you behave in a completely different way, and you go and troll everyone, and you're emotional and this and that. But why have we accepted that? That's what I don't understand. Because people go, yeah, but on the internet we should still have our anonymity. It's but why? Just because it began like that? Is that what you're saying? That's what that ecosystem is like? That just because it began like that, we should keep that?
Yeah, it should be like that.
Yeah, even though all of these teenagers are committing suicides, famous people commit suicide because of the bully culture, cancel culture. It shouldn't be called cancel culture, it should be called bully culture. Because bully culture comes along because they don't agree with someone who thinks differently.
Yes.
Newsflash, we all think differently. Grow the hell up. And so why have we accepted that we can have this anonymity? Why is it that's what I've always said, and a lot of people get angry at me because I always say it should be designed on real life. There needs to be accountability online. If you're going to be part of bully culture and someone does kill themselves, unfortunately, you need to answer to somebody for that. You don't you don't go scot-free, because you contributed to that person killing themselves.
Exactly. And again, that's not about censorship at all, really. It's all about to act like civil people. Yeah. Civil citizens, really.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. Again, when all these suicide that shouldn't happen if there was some sort of regulation coming into the cyberspace, right? It never had to happen. First of all, you don't know these people. Yeah. Maybe these people, they were already in a bad mood because they had argued with their friends or something, and they watched something, or they don't like it, they don't agree with it. They just, being a keyboard assassin. That's not being civil at all, and we need to stop acting like that. And if you were to keep the online world as it is, it's only going to get worse and worse. Yeah. Again, the story I watched of interview of this translator in Korea. He's just translating movies and documentaries and things like that. And he got to translate the big movies, like famous Marvel movies and whatnot. And he got a lot of feedback from people who saying, "Oh, that was a brilliant job," and this and that. Again, if you speak multiple languages, it is difficult to cover. For example, if it's a comedy movie, there's a lot of cultural nuance around the language.
Yep.
So it is hard to exactly translate the why it's funny to different languages. Difficult.
Yeah.
So he himself studies a lot and reads, and studies obviously films as well. Not just translating itself doesn't really get good translation. So he does a good work and whatnot, and he gets all the feedback. We're getting death threats because his translation is not quite on point. Like, how do you get the connection that you're getting death threat being a translator? Like, that's just, I don't know. That's something like beyond me, really. You know? And then that's why he almost got like a really, really bad anxiety attack. And he had to close his email account.
Jeez.
That is just like, I don't know, like, and these people were threatening his family and saying like watch out behind your head and things like that. And he was driving out of this car park and there's nobody around, but he was so scared and almost got the panic attack.
Panic attack. Yeah.
That's like, what kind of right do these people have to get these individual in that sort of a bad state of mind, in the suffering? You know, like and someone's got to be accountable. Are they? But no, it's all online. You can do whatever you want. You can say whatever the hell you want, because there is that, like you said, the bulletproof anonymity.
So to protect the silly internet ecosystem or social media ecosystem, we just allow that individual to suffer.
Exactly. People have to kill themselves. People have to suffer. People have to take bloody anti-anxiety pills for the rest of their life.
That's where I draw a line in the sand. Like, and I don't understand bully culture. I just don't get it. The people who are part of bully culture are insecure and have a lot of psychological problems. They need to seek help, because if you are so mad about seeing someone's different perspective than you, then you're not fit to be an adult, because people think differently. Grow up. As I said, grow up. Accept it. Some people have gross opinions, and that's all right. Why get so angry about it and start, like...
They just couldn't bite their tongue.
Like I always say to you when I put a post up, I put a heartfelt post up about Ukraine being invaded, and then some ridiculous individual had a negative perspective of that. And I said to you when I posted, I said, I bet you someone will find something negative in this post, even though it was from the heart and this and that. But that's the nature of that environment.
Yeah.
It's the nature of that environment is, when you have that anonymity, you can say anything to anyone. And like the person who attacked my post about Ukraine was basically being racist to Ukrainians, first of all, and were lacking sensibility about the situation itself.
Yes.
Because they thought that their virtue signaling was a higher perspective than what I had to say. And all I was saying was just giving my heart out. Like, I feel for the Ukrainian people. This should not be happening. I mean, I said it in different words than that. But, I mean, what's negative about... if you see something negative in that, you've got some sort of psychological problems and you need to seek help. And I hope you do seek help, because I have nothing against that individual. I don't even know who they are. I just know that they have some sort of psychological problem because they felt a need. And there was only one person, mind you. Most people are actually, as we always say, are good people.
Yes.
But there are those one people who have been so affected by the way that they behave in the digital world that they lose sight. And so when and this is how the digital world works, right? When I pulled that individual up for being racist and for being insensitive, they deleted their comment. But you and I, we knew it straight away. Usually I will just try to avoid those comments, but because of the sensitivity of the situation, I thought, maybe I need to say something to this individual, because they obviously don't understand what I'm saying. And this is another big problem in the digital space, is people subjectively interpret things their way, and it's actually not what's being said. So,
and that to make that sound above,
Above.
better than someone else,
or defame them.
Oh.
She was trying to defame me, right?
bullying.
Yeah, bully, yeah.
Yeah.
And then when I pulled her up for that, you know, she ran with her tail between her legs.
Yeah.
She was a female. And so the thing is that, and this is how I would actually have social media to, because you and I, because we teach Eastern spirituality, our focus is on the peace and harmony of each and every individual in the world. We understand that we're all fundamentally one. And I could care less about what Google's intentions are or Facebook's intentions. I don't have to defend technology or social media. I don't care that it's developed this way. If I ran social media, I'd be getting rid of all the comment sections, all of the positive reinforcement, and just taking it back to naturally as like a sharing platform.
Yeah.
And if that means that the social media companies disappear, so be it. Because the health and sanity of humanity is far more important than the prosperity of a few technological companies.
100%. 100%.
And so we basically covered a lot. And a lot of people will probably say, what about how we can deal with this? And I do speak about that in the book at length. I speak about the digital-free lifestyle. I speak about how the perfect technology is human. And I also put an emphasis on returning to the ancient way of life.
Yes.
And I don't mean we're going back to be hunters and gatherers, but returning to a far more ancient way of life where we have where we reduce our use of technology.
Yes.
You and I are a good example because we have a reduced. We do reduce our technological use. I know it's great that we have this podcast. I have my channel and we can share with people.
Yes.
That's a beautiful thing. We make many beautiful connections. I also talk about the benefits of technology
100%.
because of that reason.
That's exactly right.
in the
There
book.
is that benefits of having technology.
Having
as well.
technology. But I'm highlighting a lot of the negative perspective. Well, we highlighted a lot of the negative perspectives today on the podcast because I think we get swept away with the benefits of technology
Too much. Yeah.
when it's, and being negative is not negative actually. Sometimes you've got to point out the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is that people are killing themselves, people are becoming addicted, people are going mad. We have to pinpoint this problem.
Yes.
Because the health and sanity of humanity is of the utmost importance. And so I do mention about how we can get there, but if you want to find that out, you're just going to go and have to go and buy the book. So guys, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next time.